I painted this blue island house in a little over 1 hour. I'm going to show you the entire process, and you can watch all the color and painting decisions that I'm making in real time. I'm traveling while I'm painting this small study. I'm using my custom watercolor travel palette, which I've grown very fond of using. The paper that I'm using is an Arches watercolor sketch pad, and it says it's 6 by 10 inches, but really the surface that you have to paint with is closer to 6 by 9.5. And I feel like it's the perfect size for smaller paintings. I'm choosing to use a flat brush at this time, and I've mixed some cobalt blue and ultramarine blue and some turquoise for colors in the sky. My brush in the sky work here is moving very quickly, and yet this is real time. It's not sped up at all. I'm also painting outside on a balcony in Waikiki, so the paper is drying really quickly, which is something that I really love. I'm leaving the white of the paper wherever I think I'd like the clouds to be. This will help create some contrast. Using various blues keeps the blue element of the sky interesting. The turquoise and the cobalt are sweeter, and the ultramarine blue is a cooler blue, so that blue helps to tone down the brightness. Right now I'm working on simplifying my smaller paintings. I believe this is good training for capturing the essence of a subject quickly, and that helps you paint outdoors, plein air. I feel like that helps with sketchbook paintings. So the bottom section of this blue house, I'm still going to use my flat brush, and I'm mixing the warm tones. The house is going to be sitting on lava rock, but there's just some dry brush area and it's just warm, and I'm deciding to put this in first. I'm going to work in the background of the house, and I'm going to put in some of the green hues and get in some of the tones that are going to be the backdrop of the foliage. Basically the bushy palm areas and the greenery. I'm going to just suggest those with brush strokes. If my paper's still a little bit wet, I'm able to drop color in and let it spread out a little bit. I'm trying to get a variety of bright yellows and greens in the background. It's just, you want to kind of keep color moving around your piece. At this point, I'm going to start putting in a rusty red color for the shed. There's the Blue Island house, there's the shed. There's actually two other structures. They're kind of like two different sheds on the right-hand side of this scene. And I'm going to capture those. I really enjoy painting architecture, so this painting is really fun for me to make. Sometimes when you're painting a structure, it's kind of like, and this could apply to, is it a structure of a flower? Like when I paint tropical flowers, sometimes they have very, very bold structures like heliconias, so they're almost very architectural flowers. In this case, I'm painting literal buildings. Sometimes it's a good idea to paint what's around that building, and this helps you to create a depth. So I'm gonna be pushing certain areas to the background. So my foliage in the background is going to be a little bit lighter. It's going to be a little bit more free flow. I'm going to be creating the background foliage with just brush strokes. It's just, create brush strokes. You might want to practice this by just putting down different colors, tones, and of greens or cool shades or shadowed blues, and then just experiment with brushes that are like flat brushes or round brushes, or your brushes that have points, and just create brush strokes to kind of suggest those background shapes and the textures. And that's kind of how I paint the really complicated island jungle scenes. I've been doing this for 25 years, I want to say, painting tropicals. Sometimes the background jungly scene sections, those can be the most expressive, but you have to know how to simplify them. So this Venetian red, this is on my palette, and it's a color that I've used on and off for many years. It's a very opaque color, so a little bit goes a long way. I'm going to use it here in the foreground just because I need this to be a strong color, and I'm going to be using it a little bit in the architecture. It's an interesting color. A lot of watercolor is working with negative space. Look for the areas where you just want your highlights to pop out. Make sure those areas don't get covered. While I'm taking my brush here and I'm using my brushes that have points, I'm just kind of creating little areas where I'm going back and forth between lighter colors and darker colors. I'm making sure that I don't overpaint over everything. So if you press down on your brush and you create like a thicker mark, that's going to help you create your trees, your marks for your trees. You're going to need a lot of different variety in how you're going to paint trees and bushes and shrubs and palms, and it's good to experiment. And I find that if I don't paint a certain scene for a while, I can lose some of those techniques. And at this point in the painting, I'm looking at the background, and If I was doing like a plein air painting, the way that I suggested the palms and the background shrubs, those could have been great just as is, and I could have just worked a little bit more simply with the blue house. I've painted small on and off through the years, and I can tell you that there's an art to painting small. If you are used to painting large, then going small is quite challenging. And I've also noticed that this statement can also be applied in reverse. Artists who usually paint small, I feel like when they go large sometimes, they can struggle with having enough to say to keep the piece interesting. When painting small, every brushstroke counts. It's easy to overwork a painting, which is something that I'm masterful at doing, and especially with watercolor, it's a rather unforgiving medium, so if you go too far with a painting, then it's near impossible to backtrack a few steps. There's no undo button. It's very easy to lose the freshness of an area that might have felt so simple, and yet I feel too that there's a boldness in taking risks just to see how far one can push a painting. Knowing when to stop takes experience and maybe even some luck. It used to be that it's difficult to change any given artistic style. I've had this conversation many times through the years with other artists, both professionals and amateurs. Today I feel like that statement is no longer true. We have YouTube and social media to show us how other artists are creating work. This opens up artistic styles and doors, and it allows us to experiment as artists and expand our work. But I do want to go back to the concept of painting smaller and being more simplified. In watercolor, I feel like artists are either born with a detailed style, or they're born with a style that's more simplified and just to the point. And those artists can capture the essence of a scene with very few brush strokes and maybe just even like 2 colors. I really admire that. As I was clearly born with a very, very detailed style, and I love painting detailed, I also very much admire artists that are very different from myself. At this point in my art business, I'm looking to try to figure out how to paint small again with watercolor, and I'm inspired by artists that I see who are just able to capture a very, very, very quick scene, or I should say better, they're able to capture an amazing scene, an ambience in a scene very quickly with very few brushstrokes. I'm trying to learn how to do that. I feel like that's something that I'm working on with my sketchbook journey, and it's something that I'm going to be exploring this year. When painting architecture, I feel like one of the better brushes to use is a flat brush. It's better to do architecture in layers. The way to not get your architecture to look muddy is by letting areas kind of completely dry in between layers. I like to vary my hues. Like this Blue Island house, part of its beauty is that it's rustic and the paint's fading and peeling. That's part of what makes this house beautiful. I'm using certain blues, I'm using areas that are kind of gray on my palette, and I'm using a smaller flat brush. And by the way, this is not an expensive brush. This is a brush that I would like give my son to use. It's just that it happened to be in my travel watercolor set here, and I thought I'm gonna give it a try. As I'm painting downwards, I'm just going slower, and you can notice that my brush stroke is actually moving a lot slower than when it is moving when I'm painting like the sky and the brush and the palm trees, and I'm just gonna carefully work Island House in layers. And then at some point I'm going to start doing shadows. And with the shadows, I'm going to go a little bit dark, usually at the top, and then I'm usually going to feather it out a little bit with the water. This year I'm going to be focusing, when I travel, I'm going to be practicing trying to paint simplified and quick. So like a painting like this right here, which takes me a little bit over an hour to do, and my brush is moving very quickly. I'm going to see if I can't start creating some watercolors on location where I'm capturing a similar scene but more simplified, but I'm capturing the essence in maybe more like 20 minutes. As an artist, I feel like you have to always continue to grow and change. Just because you can, that keeps it interesting and fresh. I first began painting architecture as a teenager, and I love painting architecture. I used to paint city scenes. I love the complexity of that. It's something that I feel is interesting. The places that we live in say a lot about us. I feel like a house doesn't need to be brand new to be beautiful, and in these island homes, they're well loved and they're lived in. Part of the beauty is how they age. So now the roof line here, the sun's shining down on it. It's a metal roof, and it's probably more in like a rusty red color that's, changed a little bit through the years. I need to capture that sunlight. I'm just gonna suggest the red by basically using some cool shadow colors. My brush strokes are very minimal. They're very soft. And then the little bit of red that I do use is same, very minimal and very soft. And you're gonna notice that to create the architecture, I'm gonna go in a specific set of lines that are parallel to each other with these flat brushes. I'm going to continue layering some darker colors, and I'm going to let some of the sunlight colors shine through. So that's kind of working negative space in the background jungle area. I'm going to work around the island house, and I'm going to start doing some really dark areas. This is my contrast, and I'm going to make sure I leave some really light areas. It's going to help bring the house to the foreground a little bit, and it's going to start pushing some of the areas in the background further back. In this trip, my goal was to paint a couple times a day, every single day, and I'm proud to say that I did that. So I'm really starting to add some of the darker tones. I waited until this point in the painting to do this because I don't want to lose my light tones. I don't want to lose my whites. I don't want to lose my sunlight colors. I don't want to lose the variety of greens that I have in this painting. I feel like they're very well mixed. I've got a good variety of foliage colors. I'm proud with that. I'm careful that I'm not overworking my Blue Island house. In this trip, I painted, I want to say, I think I painted somewhere between 9 and 12 paintings. This piece by far was my favorite painting. It flowed the best. I've painted this piece before in oils, so that could be why I'm familiar with the subject. That could easily be why I feel like this painting worked out the best for me. But then also, I feel like I excel with architecture, and I really love the details in architecture. So now that I'm adding some of the more details in the planks, I've decided to risk it. And like I said, I'm one of those people that I'm born as a natural detail person versus an artist that's born with more minimal brush strokes in their style. I've switched from my flat edge brush, and now I've got like a brush with a point, and I'm kind of like emphasizing a little bit of the detail in the planks. And now I'm going to go and put in, it's like fencing alongside in front of the house. This area is just, I didn't want to use liquid Frisket. I felt like for something like this, to get the best results, I just decided to use my titanium white, and that's why it's there on my palette. You want to make sure that you get enough of that paint on your brush and that it's thick enough. And then you want to have your brush, if you're painting something like what I did, which is a fencing that's got white highlights, you want to make sure that paint's fairly thick, and you want your brush standing straight up so you can really take advantage of the point. And when I needed that area to be a little bit thicker, you press down a little bit more on the brush, and that's how you create that. And I'm just going to pull a little bit of highlights in. I'm going to spend a couple minutes here and there doing that, and that's going to help tie this painting in a little bit. It's going to bring back just a little bit more of some of the white that I lost. To be transparent about this white, not to make a pun, but this white is it's more of an opaque white. It's really hard for white watercolor paint to be totally opaque, especially over darker colors. So I'm kind of using it like gouache. And it's the gouache painters that gave me this idea, because I never had any titanium white on my palette. In all the years that I painted as a watercolor painter and sold watercolor paintings, I really didn't use white as a color. I used the white of the paper, and I used a lot of liquid Frisket. And I would use lifting paint. So that's the other technique that you can do. But when you need just a little bit of highlight, like when you've got bright, bright, bright sunlight coming in, something like this white here, just get it really thick on your brush and then just dab it, and then see if that sticks or if it absorbs into the paper. And that's another thing that I feel like is important to talk about. Watercolor always, and my mom asked me this because she's learning watercolor. She wanted to know if watercolor dries darker or lighter, but it dries lighter, and that's because your paper absorbs in. So the thicker your watercolor paper is, the harder you're going to have to work to get your colors dark and vibrant to create contrast. I loved how this painting turned out. This is by far my favorite painting from all the paintings that I did in this trip. I love it, and I hope that you enjoyed watching this. Please subscribe if you found value in this and hit the bell notification. This will help get you notified of my new painting videos. I also have an art newsletter. You can find that on my website, floravita.lights.painting. I create original reverse painted glass chandeliers and works of art for the wall in oil, watercolor, and mixed media. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.